This is a podcast by WellHouse Church, where certain things are fixed, the essentials of faith, and the best beer is served on tap, while everything else is just a matter of perspective. What's cracking, beer lovers?
What up?
We back to drink some more beer and talk about the Bible.
Talk about the Bible. I'm actually excited. I'm proud of myself today.
Because you did something extremely different.
I did something extremely different because you all been giving me so much crap about being a hophead.
I am proud of you. Is still a heavily hopped beer based on what the can says.
Well, it's just made by a brewery called Hopworks.
Which insinuates a decent amount of hops.
All beer has hops.
Yeah, but the level of hops and the kind of hops you use make it different.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does.
But yeah, no, he got a sour.
I did. So apparently Hopworks Urban Brewery is out of Portland, Oregon. Hey, that's a good brewing city. It's
Not as good as Houston. Hey, St. Arnold.
It's true. It's not as good as Houston, but
Hit us
Houston's not as good as Fort Collins, Colorado.
No, that's true.
It's the brewing capital of the nation.
St. Arnold's. Hit us up. We want a partner.
It's independent craft, certified by the Brewers Association. It's 5.6 ABV. It's a recyclable can, which I love. And it's called a Stoner Fruit Apricot Sour.
The stoner
That's
part
throwing me
leads
off a little bit.
That leads me to believe that it's heavily hopped.
Yeah, I don't know. So if you don't know, beer lovers, hops is a cousin to cannabis in the greenery family. It's a cousin, and weed is legal in Oregon, so I'm sure they're doing some play there on their words and their marketing.
You actually see that pretty common in like IPAs and heavily hopped beers.
Yeah.
They'll like
Purple Haze IPA.
Yeah, whatever. They'll make jokes related to weed, and it's funny.
Yeah, hops is a cousin to cannabis, and it is what it is. So you just got to know, and that's why they make jokes like that.
I am not a sour fan.
Clayton is not. We were at the store, and I was like, "Hey, dude, you want to drink this sour?" And he was like, "No."
Yeah, I've drank many a sours in my day.
In my day, you old person.
Well, actually, like in Belgium, sours are moderately popular.
Yeah.
And I've drank quite a few, and I can't get there.
Yeah.
And so, I have an amber that I'm super excited about, the Thirsty Goat, 6.8 ABV. I don't know what else to say about it other than, I mean, it's an amber. I've never had it before.
The name's cool. Thirsty Goat.
Thirsty Goat. Yeah, that's pretty
cool.
It reminds me of that How I Met Your Mother episode with the goat.
Oh, with the goat. Yeah, with the goat.
What was the goat? Missy
the goat. That's right.
Missy the goat.
I don't know how you almost forgot that. That's our mom's name.
Yeah. Hey, this is important to mention. Didn't know this. Just read it. Bottled and brewed in Houston.
Hey.
Or I'm sorry, not in Houston, in Austin.
Oh, but love that.
Love it. Love Texas beers.
Yeah.
Anyways, I want to get into this.
All right, let's do it. Cheers.
Oh shit.
Wow.
I need my monk.
It's not hoppy at all.
No?
Nope. Not hoppy at all. True sour. Definitely get the apricot. Very, very nice.
You know, there hasn't been a time on this podcast where I had a critique.
Oh, yeah?
One critique. Could actually use a little bit more hops.
On an amber?
Mm-hmm.
That's saying something.
Yep, it's kind of... it's good. Like, for what they're trying to do, it's good. It's just, it's lacking some depth for me. And I think that is...
I get that.
Could come from, like, some Centennial.
But okay, so that's what I was going to ask. Is it that it needs additional hops or it needs a different style of hop?
It could be a little of both.
Okay.
I think it would benefit from a more bold hop. The malt flavor is very prominent, low level bond, and so it is lacking a little, I think.
Well, it can't be that low, because it's amber, so it's got to be at least.
It's on the lower end of the amber scale.
Yeah, well, it's got to be at least 300 level bond to get that
Something
caramel
like that.
color.
But it is lower, right? In the retrospect of amber.
Yeah.
And so it's just
You're not getting some of that more roasted flavor of the higher level bond
that you should.
Yeah.
That I expect in an amber.
Yeah, and so so if you're not going to get that, you kind of want to sub it in with a little bit more complexity in the hop. Yeah. I get that.
That's just my critique, right? Like, it's not a bad beer. I think it's a good beer.
Yeah.
But and I know this isn't a beer reviewing.
Well, it kind of is.
Kind of.
I mean,
we don't do this very often where we. I don't know.
But we don't really find beers that we have to critique. I mean, I was sitting here and I'm like, I actually really like this.
That's sour?
This sour. I mean, it may be one that I return to. And I'm not a huge sour person. I do like some sours. I don't like berry-based sours. So like raspberry sours or blueberry sours or anything like that, strawberry sours. I think the berry base is too tart.
Yeah.
But an apricot adjunct I think is really, really nice.
I haven't had a stone fruit sour. I mainly have had like berry sours.
I don't like the berry sours.
I've never done like an apricot or a peach or something like that.
I also don't like super high citrus sours like lemon or lime or orange. I don't like those.
I have had those. I don't like those.
Yeah, all those things, they're just too tart.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well,
we've done the beer portion.
Before we get into the theology portion, I want to make a disclaimer.
Oh.
It's like 11:30 at night.
Yes.
We're 4 podcasts in. We're exhausted.
And each, 2 or 3 cups of coffee in now?
Yeah. So we're running on fumes here. So forgive us if we're not as enthusiastic as we normally are.
Which is probably a good thing because we got really enthusiastic last week.
We did. We got really enthusiastic the last couple of weeks, but we're both just really passionate about the Bible. Yeah. And we want to show people, I mean, you have a story about the last couple episodes in this series.
I do. I forgot. Yes. I did want to tell you all this because it does show our love for the Bible, but it also shows the need to have this conversation. Before the last episode came out, so we're recording this on Friday, the day after the inspiration inerrancy conversation was released. Before that episode released, I got asked 3 different questions in the span of the time that we recorded the episode to the time that the episode released. I got asked 3 different times questions that came back to inerrancy and inspiration.
Yeah.
3 different times in 1 week.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that needs to be had, and this is a question that people have.
Yep.
And it is becoming increasingly more. How do I word this? It is becoming increasingly more. People are becoming increasingly more aware that the Bible is not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just not even necessarily like biblical scholars, while that is happening too, but just general people, right? Just churchgoers.
Yeah.
They are, and not, some of them aren't even churchgoers. A couple of the people that asked me don't attend church regularly.
Yeah, well, and that's the point that I would make. I think before we were able to get away with certain things around the conversation of inerrancy because people just didn't have the resources accessible to them to fact check.
Yeah.
But we live in an information age. We live in the digital age. We live where more information is available to the average person at their fingertips than has ever been true, even for people who were in places of resources.
Which is both good and bad.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a blessing and a curse. And so people are now able to check it across one another. And I just feel like we're playing a weird game of jump rope that almost doesn't need to be played, because people have these questions and they have the ability to Google and ask these questions to Google and get a number of answers from a number of different perspectives. Excuse me. And from a lot of perspective, like from a lot of traditions that honestly don't care about inerrancy.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
I mean,
that is a fair point.
That's only an American evangelical position.
Yeah, more or less.
I mean, or people that American evangelicals have reached.
I have talked to many Catholics about this.
They couldn't care less. It's a pointless doctrine to them.
And lots of them are like, what? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Like they don't,
it's not even a conversation
that they have, so they don't even know the terminology.
Yeah, it's not on their radar.
And so I have to explain, it's the Bible is without error, and most of them are like,
yeah, they're like, really? Yeah.
Like, this is a question for you guys? Like,
yeah.
I mean, remember, for them, apostolic succession and all that stuff, like it's a different kind of conversation.
Scripture is not the end all be all for a Catholic.
So yeah, no, that's solely us that are asking this question.
Yeah. So with all of that, I wanted Clayton to tell that story because it goes to show that, like, this is a question that people have. This is a conversation that people are having, and if the church doesn't also engage in this conversation, we're going to be left behind.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I think that is why we are increasingly seeing this younger generation walking away from the church.
Yeah.
Right. We talked about this on Tuesday, about like this whole idea of being a church for people who've been hurt. Right.
Yeah.
Well, lots of times people have these questions and leadership is just like, oh no, just believe what the Bible says.
Yeah. Well, right? I was literally talking to my leadership coach the other day, and he was asking me some questions. I love my leadership coach because he does not pull punches. He asks very difficult questions and forces me to come up with answers. And he was asking me how
good coach.
He's a very good coach. He was asking me how my deconstruction journey impacts my pastoring.
Mm.
And if my deconstruction journey is fully lining up with our culture. Long story short, the answer is yes. But that's one of the questions that he was asking, kind of probing, because I was working through some of the, like, just hurdles that WellHouse has to jump. But one of the things I told him is, as we got into this, he began to ask me and probe me about my deconstruction journey. And he goes, what spawned this for you? And I was like, genuinely, I had questions and the answers I were given was insufficient.
Yeah.
Like, when I asked, why can't women do this? The answer I was given was insufficient.
Yeah.
When I asked, why do we believe that the Bible is inerrant? And they say, because the Bible says it. I'm like, where?
Well,
and like they want to point to 2 Timothy, and I'm like, oh, well, it doesn't actually say that. And that's just an insufficient answer.
And I'm sorry, but you can't use the text in question to prove that same text.
That is a fallacy.
You know, like
that is fallacious. Yeah, you can't do that.
And so, but this episode is not about inerrancy.
Well, it is, but it's not.
Right. It's a follow up.
Yeah, it's about canonization, and if you've done any study on canonization, you know that it's not detailed clearly.
No, not at all.
Most people will tell you that it began in 200 BC and was completed sometime in between 200 and 300 AD. But here's the problem. When I learned in undergrad or my first master's degree or somewhere, I was told that the canonization process was finalized at something called the Council of Jambia. In the last 5 years or so, that's really come under scrutiny to not being a real thing. And very, very big name theologians are no longer supporting the Council of Jambia. So, take that with what you want. No matter whether that council existed or it was done at another council that's not recorded somewhere, we've lost the documentation, whatever, it happened. But there were some criteria for what canonization was. And largely, the Torah was canonized very quickly.
Sure.
So the Torah is the first five, or the Old Testament, the Pentateuch was canonized very quickly. First 5 books of the Old Testament, very quickly. Prophets, shortly after that. Wisdom literature, shortly after that. The writings. Like, the Old Testament was formed pretty quickly. That there wasn't really much question there. The Apocrypha in the Catholic and Orthodox, there was some shroud around it, and so it wasn't fully canonized. But
it doesn't make them any less valuable.
No, not at all. And so there were 4 criteria. I need to pull up my notes for what canonization was. And so outside of the Old Testament, specifically the New Testament, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. First was apostolic origin. So it had to come from an apostle, and specifically an apostle who could directly tie their lineage to Jesus at some level, or someone connected to Jesus. Because interestingly enough, Luke never met Jesus, and yet he writes Luke and Acts.
Yeah.
So they were a first century apostle that was connected to someone who who was with Jesus, one of the original. Okay. It had to be universally accepted. So unanimous across the board that Christian communities all over the known world were using it. It had to have liturgical use, and it had to have a message that was consistent with the rest of the scriptures. Okay, so it had to have a consistent message. Now, few things there. Let's take those, okay? Apostolic origin. Is that true? Did all of the New Testament end up from apostolic origin?
I mean, kind of depends on interpretation.
We know a lot more about it now than we did back then.
Really kind of depends on interpretation.
It really does.
Because Paul never directly walked with Jesus.
Well, but Paul does say that he met Jesus on the road to Damascus.
Sure. But that.
But he's also an apostle.
Right.
He's not a disciple. He's not one of the 12, but he's an apostle.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. Apostolic origin.
Okay.
So, but we know a lot more about them now. And we have questions about some of the authorship.
Yeah.
For instance, we have no idea who wrote Hebrews.
No clue.
That might not have been an apostle.
Maybe not.
There's pretty substantial evidence that says that John, the apostle, did not write Revelation.
Yep.
There's pretty ample evidence that 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus weren't written by Paul.
Yep.
There's a lot of evidence, and I say it all the time. It depends on which side of the bed I wake up on, where I'm at on this issue. I can't decide if John, the Gospel of John, was written by John himself or the followers of John after his death, or some combination of both. But
does that really matter?
Well, his followers are not apostles.
No, but I'm just saying that, like, and this is that's my point, right? Like, in the overall scheme of things, does that matter? To the council, obviously,
to the canonization process, it mattered.
Yeah, but like, why?
Yeah, but here's the deal. So there are lots of other things that are written by apostles
that aren't.
Yeah, they're
canonized.
called the Apostolic Fathers. You can go look them up. Yeah. I have a copy. Very valuable resources. One of them is titled the Epistle of Barnabas. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, Barnabas is an apostle. Mm-hmm. That letter is very valuable. I do think it's very valuable, and yet it didn't make it into the canon.
Yep.
Very interesting to me. Very interesting to me. Barnabas is a less known apostle.
Sure.
But he walks with Paul. He does the work of Paul. He goes with Luke, who's also there. I mean,
and Paul talks about him a few different times. Like,
I mean, him and Mark are friends. Like, they're all around each other. And he writes a letter that's extremely valuable and has massive manuscript evidence to support its truth. And yet it didn't make it in.
Yeah.
So interesting. So
it is interesting.
So it had to have apostolic origin. It also had to have universal acceptance. This is the problem. Because not everybody was using all the books. And it depended on where you were. I mean, you got to understand, by 200 or 300, when we're working this stuff out, I mean, you got Tertullian in Africa.
Yeah.
You got the Cappadocians and the Greek fathers. You got all the Alexandria guys, Origen and Clement, over there in Egypt trying to do their thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you got people scattered across this, and you got Gnosticism running rampant.
Oh, yeah.
You got all these people combating Gnosticism and doing it in different ways. And then at one point, you got all the Greek people over here doing their thing, and you got the Alexandrian people doing their thing, but then you get the Antiochians over here, and the Alexandrians are doing a very allegorical, kind of metaphorical, really spiritual kind of interpretation of these things. But then you get the Antiochians who are much more like, no, expository, we're going to read it for what it is, and that's it. But then you got the Africans over here, and then from them arise the Desert Fathers, and like people are all over the world trying to wrestle with these questions, and they're using different books.
Yeah.
They just are.
And so it becomes very, very difficult to say if it has to be universally accepted. To say, okay, well, it seems like everyone uses this in some way, right? Yep. Utilizes this for something and utilizes this for something. But isn't that exactly one of the main problems with the modern church? With congregant-led churches in that way.
That it has to be my way or no way. That it has to be universally accepted. It's got to be exactly the way we want it to be, kind of thing.
Yeah. Isn't that the problem? Or one of the problems?
Yeah.
Because shouldn't we, if we elect leaders in some way, whatever that looks like, shouldn't we trust that God put them there for a reason and that we need to follow their leadership?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So if we have this council to decide,
wherever it is, if it's Jambia or somewhere else,
right, whoever this council of people of faith are, whoever they are, wherever they are, whatever, shouldn't we have let them to decide without the universal acceptance?
Well, it is a fair question, but there are some other things that happen. So it's got to have a liturgical use.
Sure.
which means it's got to be read and preached in church, or it has to have prayers or those kinds of things. Which is fine. But then it says it has to have a consistent message, which I get.
That is totally fair and a way to an extent. But it's not. But it is.
No, it's fair, but it doesn't hold true.
No, that is yes.
So
fair
and
enough.
I get it. Remember what I said. They're trying to combat Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
Gnosticism running rampant. There's a lot of pseudepigraphic letters being written that are not there. You can go look these up. They're called the Apocrypha, the Christian Apocrypha, the New Testament Apocrypha. You've got the Gospel of Mary. You got the Gospel of Thomas. You got the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. You've got the Gospel of Peter. You've got the Gospel to the Hebrews. You've got a ton of them. It almost seems like every Easter, one of them pops up. It's like, oh, the forgotten gospel. No, it's not forgotten. We just rejected it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't tell a Christian message. Yeah. It says that the body doesn't matter. It's all about the soul. Who cares about the body? Jesus wasn't divine. At one point in the Gospel of Thomas, like you got Jesus pushing people off roofs. Like it's just nonsense. It doesn't make sense.
It's flipping crazy.
And honestly, a lot of the narratives that we get that are just kind of around Christendom come from those Gospels.
Yeah.
Like the whole deal that Jesus is married to Mary Magdalene, that comes from one of the apocryphal Gospels.
Yeah.
It's not like we've rejected those. So I get the issue of it being a consistent message.
Sure. But
I'll be honest, at face value, James does not seem to be a consistent message with the rest of the New Testament.
No, and we talked about this last week, that was one of Martin Luther's big things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that James felt like he was pushing a works-based faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it very much does seem that way.
Yeah. I mean, if you read it correctly,
if you just read it for what it is.
It seems like you got to work for this.
Yeah.
It's not totally freely given. Now, I think we have found ways to massage it.
Yeah, sure.
And make it more unifying and coherent with the rest of the New Testament. But
if you just
at face value, it's like it seems to be a works-based faith.
Yeah. And so, yeah, no, you're right. James doesn't seem like it fits. And I still always have this question in the idea of fitting into the larger narrative.
Mm-hmm.
What is Jude doing there?
Yeah, Jude's a weird one, as well as honestly Philemon.
Yeah. Also, yeah, no, that's a fair
Philemon
point.
is a really interesting one. I don't want to speak on Jude because I'll be honest, I'm just not. It's not a book that I'm super comfortable
expositing and talking about.
Well, no, I would exposit it, but it's not one that on a whim I could talk about. I'm a Paul guy. I'm a Gospels guy. I'm not a general epistles guy.
No,
I don't know those as well.
I have read Jude several different times trying to answer this question. Like, what is its function here? And I cannot figure it out.
Well, and so you've brought up First Enoch a couple of times. It's not a New Testament thing, so we're going to leave it out of this conversation. Sure. But the Jude one is a weird one. I mean, it's an apocalyptic letter, and a lot of Paul's letters are apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Don't miss that. The Thessalonian letters are apocalyptic.
According to N.T. Wright, that is how Paul wrote everything, is through the lens that he believed that he was living in the end times, essentially.
So maybe that's a good clarification. The apocalypse, so Revelation, the letter or the work Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, the Greek word is apocalypse, but it is the apocalypse, definite article, the apocalypse. That is not what we mean when we say apocalyptic literature.
No.
It is a worldview through which you write.
Yeah.
Jude is apocalyptic.
Yes.
Many of Paul's letters are apocalyptic. I disagree with Tom on that. I don't think all of Paul is apocalyptic.
I feel like he's writing from the stance. This is another conversation.
Yeah. We need to have that at another time. But I disagree with Tom on that at that point. But so Jude's an interesting one. I'll be honest. Jude's a very interesting one. I don't know exactly what to do with it. Philemon is an interesting one. Let me say, I'm glad Philemon is there.
Sure.
Because I do think it's valuable. I do think Paul is clearly rejecting slavery in that text.
Yes.
And if you know anything about WellHouse, you know that we're diehard partners with Elijah Rising. Shout out, ending sex trafficking through prayer, awareness, all those things, and great candles.
Intervention and restoration.
There you go. Like I said, forgive us, we're tired.
Previous volunteer.
Yeah. They hold that letter very seriously at Elijah Rising. Love that. I'm glad it's there. But I also go, okay, what's going on? Because slavery is still a thing in 200 and 300 AD.
Yeah.
So it's like, why is that there? And to be honest, it doesn't promote a consistent message, because Paul says in 2 other letters, Colossians and Ephesians, where he gives household codes that, by the way, he stole. At least the format of a household code. A household code he stole from Plato.
Yeah. Or
he tells slaves to obey their masters.
Yeah, he does.
So this whole idea that the canonization process was dead set and undeniable and no question, it's just a false narrative.
Yeah.
It's not set in stone the way that we want to believe that it is.
And so really the point of this episode was to tell you that there is always questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be questions.
Yep.
And it's okay.
And that's okay.
And you know what? We've said this multiple times on this podcast. We've said it on other podcasts. If your God is not big enough to handle your questions, there's something wrong.
If your God is not big enough to handle your questions in the most loving and pastoral way possible, your God is whack.
Yeah. We need to be comfortable with accepting these questions. And accepting when people ask questions. And not everyone is going to see it the same way. That is why there are 3 different versions, accepted versions, of the Bible. And when I say versions, I mean versions of canonization, not translations.
Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox.
Yeah. And all of them are fine. All of them are valid.
Yeah.
We use the one that we use because that's the one we use, right?
Yeah, it's our tradition. I do think, well, I don't know. Yeah, it's the one we use because we use it.
Legit, I think that's just the best way to say it.
Yeah, I don't have another reason to tell you
why you shouldn't use the Maccabees or...
Yeah, I've read those. I don't think there's anything that I go, ooh, that leads me to believe like that shouldn't be canonized.
Yeah. No
more than James anyways.
And actually what's hilarious is in our homeschool curriculum growing up, was written by a fundamentalist tradition.
Yep.
They told the story of the Maccabees to me whenever I was, I don't know,
the Hammer.
Yeah, when I was like probably 6th grade ish.
Yeah.
They told that story.
Yeah.
I've never heard this before. This is interesting. Why have I never heard this before?
Yeah. Here's what I would say to end this conversation, because honestly, I'm exhausted.
Yes.
2 things. Number 1, make sure you join us next week, because we're going to talk about what do you do with all of this information? Like, what does this even mean? We're going to talk about that next week. But here's what I would say. No matter what you think about the Bible or the process or any of that, two things. Number one, this is where faith comes in.
Yes.
This is where we say, hey, you know what? We've got to have faith that God is in control and God knows what he's doing. He's not leading us astray by giving us a book that we think is flawed.
And that is something that we do need to actually speak on a bit here, because does seem to be the common question. Well, if the Bible does have some errors in it somewhere, how can I trust it at all? How can I trust anything that it says?
Well, that's a great question. How can I trust you at all? Because you have errors.
Exactly.
And God uses you.
Exactly.
God uses me. I have errors. I think that's just a flawed idea that because it's somehow from God and used by God that it must be perfect. Because I'm from God. I'm made in the image of God. God is near and dear to me, and he's watching over me, and he uses me.
The Spirit is a part of us.
Yeah, and I screw up all the time.
Yeah.
Like, why does that somehow make the Bible disqualified or me disqualified? Because it doesn't.
It doesn't. But that is a very common question.
It is. So that's what I would say. Faith comes in here. The other thing that I would say is, you know, it's not only about faith, it's also about just the understanding that God's given us something that no matter how you feel about it, and this is what I like to say all the time, the Bible, first and foremost, if you're reading it correctly, reveals the character of God.
Yeah.
If it doesn't do anything more than that, let's forget the whole idea of revelation. Let's forget the whole idea of inspiration, which we're going to have to talk about, but let's forget those for a minute. If all it did was record the activity of God and show us the character of God,
it's doing its job.
Wouldn't that be enough?
What have we said multiple times? And we should put this on a flippin' t-shirt. The Bible is there to help you to learn to participate in godness.
Yep.
That is its sole purpose.
Yep.
And I stand by that, and I will say that till the day I die. The Bible is not there for any other reason.
Nope.
Except to help you participate in godness. So in some ways, we as Americans in the American church need to learn something from our European counterparts and our Orthodox and Catholic friends. This shouldn't even be an argument.
It's not a question.
It should not even be a question.
What I would say is, and this will be a great transition into next week's episode, but like if you're having conversations around the Bible and it's beyond just enjoyable dialogue about how you as a person beloved by God and made in the image of God can better participate in the character of God, you're reading the text wrong. That's what it's there for. It's for God to reveal himself to you and for you to better understand the manner in which he's asking you. He's inviting you to participate in his image and nature. And if you're not getting that out of it, you're reading it wrong. If it's a book that you think you can go around and point fingers at people and judge people, or if it's a book that you think you can read and it somehow gives you fire insurance, or if it's a book that is somehow some weird piece of like rabbit's foot that you think is going to get you a get out of jail free card, if it's any of those things, or even if it's just simply
a means of academic discussion.
Yeah, if it's any of those things and anything other than communicating the character of God to you and showing you how to participate in the character, nature, and image of God,
Yeah.
you're reading it wrong and you've missed the point.